On the 21st of May, way back in 1993, a paranormal documentary TV series aired on British television, and it was called Strange But True. Strange But True ran for 4 seasons from 1993 to 1997, and it was presented by British TV presenter Michael Aspel. This TV series covered so many paranormal cases, including unexplained stories, the Loch Ness Monster, vampires, ghosts, poltergeist, aliens, the list just goes on and on. Like I said before, each episode of Strange But True was introduced and narrated by Michael Aspel, and then the viewer was treated to a reconstruction of the story, along with interviews from eyewitnesses and interviews from historical researchers. One of the people responsible for giving the show structure and making sure that the story flowed was a lady named Jenny Randalls. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because Jenny Randalls is responsible for writing many paranormal books, and she is also a writer for the famous magazine 14 Times. And ever since I became interested in the paranormal and unexplained stories, I've noticed Jenny's name pop up on more than one occasion. In fact, the very first time I noticed Jenny Randalls' name was when I purchased the Strange But True books as a child. The very first book was simply called Strange But True, and the second book was called Strange But True Casebook. Now, when this TV show aired way back in 1993, I was about 10 years old, and it fast became one of my all-time favourite TV shows. It both fascinated me and terrified me at the same time, and I can safely say if it wasn't for this show, I probably wouldn't have this fascination in the paranormal that I have today. In fact, if it wasn't for the show, I probably wouldn't have created Bizarre Tales podcast and Bizarre Tales YouTube channel that you're watching right now. This show introduced me to so many different paranormal cases such as past lives, ghosts, time slips, the Loch Ness Monster, guardian angels, phantom hitchhikers, the list just goes on and on. But if there's one story that Strange But True covered that had a massive effect on me as a child and absolutely terrified me, I would have to say it is the episode on the Enfield Poltergeist.
It was a warm summer's evening when it all began. Peggy Hodgson had just put the children to bed and was looking forward to a quiet night. She had no idea that her world was about to be turned upside down.
Come on now, go to sleep, it's late. What's going on with all this noise?
It weren't us, Mum.
I heard you moving around.
It's not us.
Oh, now don't lie. I heard you. Now get to sleep. I've had enough of this.
I saw the noise, Mum.
I don't know, love. Oh, my God. Right, all of you, downstairs now. Come on, get your dressing gowns and slippers now.
But where are we going to go, Mum?
I don't know. Come on, let's get out of it quickly. Come on. Billy, come on, help me.
Peggy Hodgson took the children to the safety of a neighbour's house.
Janet, come on!
The Enfield Poltergeist is a supposed true story about a family who were haunted by a very active poltergeist way back in 1977, and it lasted up to 1979. The family was called the Hodgsons, and this story has fascinated me ever since I saw it on Strange But True, and it's something I've covered on the podcast, and it fast become one of the UK's most documented paranormal poltergeist activity cases. The Enfield Poltergeist case has gone on to be featured in so many different paranormal TV documentaries and TV dramas, including the 2016 movie The Conjuring 2. But like I said, the very first time that I was introduced to the Enfield Poltergeist case was on Strange But True, when it aired on television on the 20th of October, way back in 1995. Now, like I said, I remember this episode so well, it both terrified me and fascinated me at the same time. Now, back on that night in 1995, I was only 12 years old, and myself and my brother were watching this episode of Strange But True. My brother was 1 year older than me, he was 13 at the time. We sat in front of the TV as Strange But True started, and we stayed there. We didn't move until it had finished. We stayed there and watched the entire terrifying story of the Enfield Poltergeist unfold in front of us. That night I lay in bed listening to the creaks and the bumps all around the dark house with the bedsheet firmly over my face. But my brother, well, it seemed to have scared him even more because he spent the night in between my parents in their bed. And it's that episode, That's Strange But True, that really sticks out in my mind and really got me fascinated with the Enfield Poltergeist case. And I was very surprised to see I wasn't the only one.
Hello and welcome to The Ghost Trail.
Hello and welcome back to The Ghost Trail.
On the 1st of February in 2021, Joe and Caspian from the Ghost Trail series right here on YouTube did the very own 2-part special on Strange But True. And I was very surprised to hear that Joe and Caspian had very similar memories like myself about Strange But True, but especially Caspian and one particular story that they told on their channel, which I'm going to play for you right now.
Strange But True was incredibly formative for me. It was my favourite TV series when I was a kid, and it was my first introduction to the world of the paranormal. I learned the difference, for example, between a visual apparition and a poltergeist on Strange But True. I can remember tons of episodes. Every week I really looked forward to them coming on TV. One week I had a friend sleeping over and the intro came on and I could sort of see she was already getting a bit spooked. And then the story that was featured on that week was the Enfield Poltergeist, and they had a brilliant reconstruction where a chest of drawers just slid across the floor, and it was so simple but it was so well done. And she got so scared that she started crying and wanted to go home. And I remember just being so annoyed that she was ruining my show and saying to my mum, well, just take her home then. I want to watch the rest of it. So that's how much I loved it.
And that is Caspian's experience with Strange But True, and I just thought it was very strange but true and awesome that Caspian's memory of that particular episode was more or less the same memory I had. Oh, she had a friend who was more scared than she was, and I had a brother who was more scared than I was, even if I was scared as well. And now let's hear what Joe thought of Strange But True.
For those of you who don't know the show, Strange But True aired in the UK between 1993 and 1997, and it was presented by Michael Aspel, and I loved it just as much as Faye did. I mean, it was my TV highlight of the week, and so we thought it might be quite fun, whilst we're still in lockdown, to do a Strange But True series where we'll look at our favourite episodes, retell the stories, and show you a bit of the original footage from the show. So, let's get started.
And that's Joe's thoughts on Strange But True. And I just want to say to Joe and Caspian, thank you so much for letting me use your clips in my video. I've loved the Ghost Trail series for so long. In many ways, it actually reminds me of Strange But True, but it's presented in your unique and special way. I love you guys. Now, I must admit, it wasn't only the Enfield Poltergeist story that creeped me out on Strange But True. They also covered a story about a haunted castle in Cumbria called Muncaster Castle. There was one character in this story that was pure nightmare fuel for me, and I actually remember him more from the Strange But True book rather than the TV series. And this character was called Tom Skelton, aka Tom Fool.
Historic ghosts to go with them. You can even find them listed in the guidebooks. So far, so good for the tourist business. Our story tonight concerns one such historic site. The occasional tourist would leave terrified after a brief encounter with the supernatural, but that could always be put down to an overheated imagination. But what was more perplexing was the behavior of the overnight visitors, level-headed friends of the family. They often refused point-blank ever to spend another night in the place. They were seeing something that wasn't in the guidebooks. They were seeing the wrong ghost.
Muncaster Castle was constructed way back in 1325 on the west coast of Cumbria, and at the time of publication of the Strange But True book, the owner of the castle was a Patrick Duff Gordon Pennington. From ghostly entities pulling doors shut on Patrick to phantom footsteps following him around the castle, it is safe to say that Patrick had his first share of experiences. Patrick discovered that it wasn't only himself that could sense a strange atmosphere around the castle, his dog could too.
Between the back door and my office, come snow, come hail or shine, every night footsteps used to follow me in the dark in the winter, and I didn't like it one little bit. And the dogs don't like it much either. I've always thought this house was a fairly normal house, but just lately it's become extremely strange.
Patrick believed that his dog could sense the presence of ghosts that roamed around the castle, especially around a 600-year-old chestnut tree on the castle grounds. But it's one ghost in particular that Patrick believed his dogs could sense, and that was the ghost of Tom Skelton, Tom Fool. Now, it is said that Tom was Muncaster's castle steward and its very last fool way back in the 16th century, and it is also said that Tom wasn't a very nice man. Legend has it that Tom Fool liked to sit beneath the chestnut tree on the castle grounds. If unsuspecting visitors came across Tom Fool and asked him for directions to London, if Tom didn't like the look of them, he would direct them to the bottom of the riverbank where there was a patch of quicksand. His victims would get stuck and Tom Fool would make his way down and simply watch them sink to their death. Over the many years, historians have looked into the dark background of Tom Fool and learned that he liked to use his innocent image of a fool to gain people's trust. Legend has it he was a very, very clever man, but he was also a very, very sadistic man and very, very dangerous. And Tom Fool may also have been responsible for the death of a local carpenter.
Legend states that Tom was also responsible for the gruesome murder of a carpenter within the castle grounds, an act he carried out to win favour with his master, Sir William Pennington.
He was murdered in cold blood by Tom Fool, who then proceeded to hack off his head with a hammer and chisel. Tom Fool quickly disposed of the body, probably in the quicksand, but for some strange reason he decided to keep the head, and he proudly showed it to the then owner of the castle, Sir William Pennington. And it is said that when he presented the decapitated head of the carpenter to his master, he also cracked a joke. And legend has it that there and then that is where the phrase tomfoolery was actually born, all because of Tom Skelton, Tom Fool.
The tales of Tom Fool and a headless carpenter make for a good ghost story. But can all the bumps and bangs in the castle really be attributed to a 16th century jester? More recent incidents seem to have nothing to do with Tom Fool. More disturbing than anything that's gone before, these experiences centre on this room in the castle, the Tapestry Room.
Over the many years, the Tapestry Room has become a hotspot for paranormal activity in the castle. It is said that female visitors try to avoid the Tapestry Room at all costs, and on the rare occasions that females have entered into the Tapestry Room, they have felt an overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. On one particular night, the late Lord Carlisle spent the night in the Tapestry Room, but he didn't sleep a wink, and this was due to the haunting sounds of a crying baby coming from somewhere in the room. 10 minutes later, the chilling sounds eventually evaporated into nothingness. On another occasion, the curator of the castle also had his own experience when he was going round closing all the shutters on the windows. He noticed a strange woman walking down one of the corridors. She was wearing a brown nightdress and her hair was up in a bun. Now, despite the lady wearing a nightdress, his first rational thought was that she was a visitor of the hotel that had somehow got locked in after visiting hours. So we proceeded down the corridor to follow her and just explain to her that the castle is now closed and she needed to leave. As he rounded the corner, he noticed that the lady walked straight through one of the castle doors. And I don't mean she opened the door, I mean she actually walked straight through it. It is now believed that the ghostly image of the lady may be the mother of a former owner of the castle, and it is said that she wore a brown nightgown to bed with her hair tied up in a bun. Another story comes from a garden curator who spent the night in a room directly next to the Tapestry Room. It is said that whilst he was in bed he witnessed the wooden door swing open not once but twice, and he swears there was no one else in that part of the castle with him that night. And then there's the story of the lady who becomes separated from the castle tour guide, and she somehow found herself standing right in front of Tom Fool's portrait. Now, as this lady stood there beneath the very creepy portrait of Tom Fool, she actually heard someone approach from behind. She actually heard the footsteps on the stone floors of the castle, and she actually commented to this person who she believed was behind her about this picture she was staring at. And when there was no answer, the lady turned round to find that there was nobody there. But this confused her. She was 100% certain that she had heard the footsteps on the stone floors of the castle, which, may I add, was fully carpeted. There is no way she could have heard any footsteps approach her from behind. And then there's the story of James Cartland, who was a family friend of the castle owners, and one particular night he stayed in the Tapestry Room. It was a cold night and he decided to get himself into bed and read. It wasn't long before he started to hear the ghostly sounds of a baby crying once again. But this time it was accompanied by the sounds of another ghostly voice coming in as though they were trying to soothe the child. This lasted for about 10 minutes before once again the very chilling sounds just faded away into the night. The very next morning James arrived at breakfast and the other guests around the table could see that James hadn't slept a wink, as you can imagine, and then he went on to tell his story to the guests around the table. One particular lady looked very shocked, and she insisted that James speak to her daughter, who had stayed there a year before, and she had experienced something quite similar to what James had. So the story goes that the previous year the lady's daughter stayed in the Tapestry Room, and on the very first night she experienced some very strange things. First of all, she heard footsteps outside of the room, and then the door swung open not once but twice. She said that was bad enough, but what she would experience the next night was even worse. Now, the very next night, as the lady lay there in bed, the activity started up again. Once again, she heard footsteps outside the room, but this time it was accompanied by the voices of children. Now, at first she said this wasn't too bad. That is until the voices of the children started to either chant or sing. She couldn't decide which it was, but what she knew is that it was very, very unsettling. And she did not sleep a wink that night. And what she is sure of is that she was the only person in that part of the castle. Now, I just want to add that sometime later there were some plans that were found in the attic of the castle, and these plans suggested that the Tapestry Room was actually used as a nursery at some point in the 19th century, and we'll come back to this later. In 1994, a scientific study was set up in the Tapestry Room of the castle. The study was run by Melanie Warren and Ian Topham, who spent the night in the castle. Ian was staying in the Tapestry Room, and at around 2:45 AM he noticed a very dark figure enter into the room slowly at first, and then slowly and gradually make its way closer to Ian before disappearing before his very eyes. Ian couldn't believe what he had just seen. He was questioning himself whether he had actually seen it at all. Just at that moment, Melanie rushed into the room. She was staying in a room just directly across the way, and she'd actually seen the shadow figure enter the room just as Ian had, but from a different perspective. When she entered the room, she noticed that there was no shadow figure in sight. There was no one else in the room but Ian. They had both seen the same thing, and neither of them had any explanation for what they had seen. But Melanie remembers walking into the room and seeing Ian as white as a sheet. Now, before I end the story of the haunting of Muncaster Castle, I just briefly want to go back to the possibility that the Tapestry Room may have been a nursery at some point in the 19th century. Apparently there was a lady down in the village who died at the very old age of 92, but before she died, she gave a very interesting story to the lady of the castle. The old lady told the lady of the castle that her grandfather once knew the late Lord Muncaster's daughter, who was called Margaret Muncaster, and unfortunately she had passed away at the very young age of 11 way back in 1871. Apparently the little girl had screaming fits, and she could have been ill for quite some time, and it is possible and stands to reason that if the Tapestry Room was used as a nursery, then this could have been the room that little Margaret took her last breath before she died. And maybe, just maybe, it's the little girl's cries that are echoing through the centuries and are heard by anybody who is brave enough to sleep in the Tapestry Room. And there you have it, the haunting of Muncaster Castle, which I first heard on Strange But True and read in the Strange But True books, which I highly recommend. I'm not sure if these are out of print now, but you can quite easily pick them up on Amazon or eBay. They shouldn't be that expensive now, and they are quite a good read. I recommend them to anybody. Ever since Strange But True came to our TV screens in 1993 and left in 1997, there have been other paranormal documentary style TV series that have tried to rival this, but for me never really came close, apart from some. But for me, Strange But True will always be the best paranormal documentary TV series we have ever had in the UK.